Aaron Mitchell stood frozen at the base of the old windmill, watching Atlas paw frantically at a rotted wooden panel near the foundation. The German shepherd whined low in his throat, a sound Aaron had learned to recognize over 3 years together. A sound that meant something important, demanded attention. The late spring afternoon cast golden light across hidden meadows, turning the sea of wildflowers into waves of purple lupine and bright yellow balsam root that stretched toward distant mountains. Atlas stopped digging, looked back at Aaron with those intense amber eyes, then returned to clawing at the wood with renewed urgency. Aaron knelt beside his companion, running his fingers along the weathered planks, until he felt it, a gap where the wood had separated from the stone foundation. He pulled gently, and the board came away in his hands, revealing a narrow space behind. Atlas immediately thrust his nose into the opening, tail wagging. Aaron reached inside, his fingers brushing against something papery and old. He withdrew a yellowed envelope, its edges brittle with age, and carefully opened the flap. The letter inside was written in elegant cursive on stationery that had once been cream-colored, but had faded to the color of old bone. "My dearest Dorothy," it began, and as Aaron read the words, of longing and promise dated June 1952, his heart quickened. This was not just an old love letter. This was a mystery waiting 73 years to be solved. Please support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Aaron had not planned on becoming the kind of person who investigated decades-old mysteries when he retired from military service 2 years ago. He had imagined a quieter life, something simple and uncomplicated after years of structure and orders, and the weight of responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. He had served with honor, but the transition to civilian life proved harder than any training exercise or deployment. The silence of his small cabin on the outskirts of the Hidden Meadows Valley felt oppressive at first, the lack of purpose gnawing at him during long evenings when the mountains turned purple with dusk. Then Atlas came into his life. A 5-year-old German shepherd surrendered to the local rescue after his elderly owner passed away. The moment Aaron saw the dog sitting calmly in the kennel, head held high despite his circumstances, he recognized something familiar. Aaron was a soldier without a mission, just like him. The adoption process took less than a week, and suddenly Aaron's cabin did not feel so empty anymore. Atlas moved through the space with quiet confidence, claiming the spot by the fireplace as his own, following Aaron from room to room with loyal devotion. They fell into routines together, morning walks that stretched into hikes, evenings spent on the porch watching the sky change colors. Atlas never demanded more than Aaron could give, but somehow always knew when to press closer, when to rest his head on Aaron's knee, when to simply be present. The bond formed quickly and ran deep, the kind of connection that required no words, because it existed in glances and gestures, and an understanding that transcended language. The windmill had become their destination of choice over the past 6 months, a weathered sentinel standing on a gentle rise where the wildflower meadows began their climb toward the foothills. The structure dated back to the 1800s, according to local historians, built by homesteaders who used it to pump water for livestock and irrigation before more modern systems made it obsolete. Now it stood abandoned, its wooden tower gray with age, the blades long since removed, leaving only the skeletal frame and the small stone foundation building that once housed the pump mechanism. Aaron loved this spot for its solitude and the sweeping views it offered. From here, he could see the entire valley spread below, the town of Hidden Meadows clustered along the river, the patchwork of ranches and farms, and beyond it all, the vast wilderness of national forest climbing towards snow-capped peaks. In late spring, the meadow exploded with color, Indian paintbrush adding splashes of coral red among the lupines, delicate pink shooting stars nodding on slender stems, and the cheerful yellow faces of mule's ear creating drifts of gold. The air smelled of sage and warm earth and growing things. Birds sang from fence posts and hidden nests. Sometimes deer grazed at the meadow's edge in the early morning, lifting their heads to watch Aaron and Atlas pass with mild curiosity before returning to their breakfast. This place had become a refuge, a spot where Aaron could breathe deeply and let the knots of tension that still lived in his shoulders gradually unwind. But Atlas had changed everything with his discovery. Aaron turned the letter over in his hands, reading it again more slowly. The writer, someone named James, spoke of plans to return, of promises made beneath the stars near this very windmill, of hope for a future together despite obstacles the letter only hinted at. Dorothy was urged to wait, to trust, to keep faith. There was mention of something precious they had hidden together, something that would prove his intentions and secure their future. The letter ended with declarations of eternal love and a signature, simply James, followed by a date in June of 1952. Aaron looked up at the windmill, then out across the meadow where the wind made patterns in the flowers, like invisible hands brushing across silk. Why had this letter never been delivered? What had happened to James? And who was Dorothy? Atlas sat beside him now, panting slightly, watching Aaron's face with that uncanny awareness that made it seem like the dog understood every thought passing through his mind. Aaron folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. He had questions, and something told him that Atlas, who had led him to this discovery with such determination, would not let the matter rest. The dog had found a new mission for both of them, and Aaron felt something stir in his chest that he had not experienced in a long time. Purpose, direction, a reason to dig deeper instead of just passing time. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees, and looked down at his companion. "Come on, boy," he said quietly. "We have some investigating to do." Atlas barked once, sharp and affirmative, and together they started back down the hill toward town, the envelope tucked safely in Aaron's jacket pocket, the mystery of the windmill and the wildflowers calling them forward into an adventure neither could yet imagine. The next morning, Aaron drove into town, with Atlas sitting alert in the passenger seat, the envelope resting on the dashboard between them. Hidden Meadows was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the hardware store doubled as the local gossip hub and the diner served breakfast all day to ranchers and retirees alike. Aaron headed straight for the small veterinary clinic on Main Street, where his friend Jake Sullivan practiced. Jake had grown up in these valleys, left for veterinary school, then returned home to serve the community despite better-paying opportunities elsewhere. He knew the land and the people, as well as anyone. And if there was a Dorothy still living in the area, Jake would know her. The clinic sat in a converted house with a hand-painted sign swinging above the door. Atlas trotted inside like he owned the place, familiar with the smells of antiseptic and animals. Jake emerged from the back room, tall and lean with permanent smile lines around his eyes, wiping his hands on a towel. "Aaron," he called out warmly, then noticed the envelope. "What brings you in?" Aaron handed over the letter without preamble and watched Jake's expression shift from curiosity to surprise as he read. When Jake looked up, his eyes had gone serious. "Dorothy Chen," he said quietly. "Lives about 2 miles from the windmill, has for over 50 years. She is the last original resident in that part of the valley." Aaron felt his pulse quicken. "Is she?" He hesitated. "Is she all right?" Jake folded the letter carefully. "She is tough as old leather, but she has been under pressure lately. Real estate developers want her land. She has been refusing to sell, but they are making it difficult for her." Aaron glanced down at Atlas, who sat perfectly still, watching both men with those intelligent eyes. "We need to talk to her," Aaron said, and Jake nodded agreement. They found Dorothy Chen's house an hour later, a small, well-maintained cottage tucked against the hillside, where the wildflower meadow began its transition to scrub pine and juniper. A vegetable garden thrived behind chicken wire fencing, and wind chimes sang softly from the porch. Dorothy answered their knock with a wariness that spoke of recent troubles, but her face softened when she saw Jake. She was a small woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her posture still straight despite her years, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. When those eyes landed on Atlas, something remarkable happened. The dog, who normally maintained a respectful distance with strangers, walked directly to her and sat at her feet, looking up with an expression Aaron had never seen before, something almost like recognition. Dorothy's hand trembled slightly as she reached down to touch the German shepherd's head. "He looks like," she began, then stopped herself. "Please come in." Her home was modest but filled with carefully tended things. Embroidered cushions and photographs in mismatched frames, books stacked on every available surface. She served tea in delicate cups painted with cherry blossoms, while Aaron explained about finding the letter. When he placed the yellowed envelope on her coffee table, Dorothy went very still. For a long moment she said nothing, just stared at the handwriting visible through the thin paper. Then tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her weathered cheeks. "James," she whispered, and the name carried the weight of 73 years of waiting. "He wrote this the week before he shipped out. I waited at the Windmill every day for months, but he never came. No one could tell me what happened to him. After a while, people told me to move on, to forget. But how could I forget the only man I ever loved?" Dorothy's story unfolded slowly, each detail emerging like artifacts from an archaeological dig, precious and fragile. She had been 21 in the summer of 1952, daughter of Chinese immigrants who had settled in Montana after the war. Her parents ran a small restaurant in town and held traditional views about their daughter's future, which included an arranged marriage to a young man from another Chinese family in Billings. But Dorothy had other ideas and other dreams. She met James Whitmore at a community dance, a young soldier home on leave before his next deployment. He was kind and earnest, and when he looked at her, he saw Dorothy, not just the Chinese girl whose parents owned the restaurant. They began meeting in secret, knowing both their families would disapprove for different reasons. The Windmill became their place, far enough from town that no one would stumble across them, beautiful in its isolation. They talked about everything under those wide Montana skies, making plans for a future they both knew would be complicated but worth fighting for. James promised he would return from his deployment, that they would face their families together, that love would be enough. Before he left, they hid something at the Windmill, a symbol of their commitment. James never told her what happened to it, or where exactly it was hidden, just that she would know when the time was right. Then he was gone, and the letters stopped coming, and Dorothy's heart broke in ways that never fully healed. Her parents did eventually try to arrange a marriage, but she refused, choosing instead a lifetime of independence and solitude, rather than settling for anything less than what she had known with James. She never married, never left the valley, built this house near the Windmill so she could see it every day, a monument to possibility and loss. Jake leaned forward, his veterinarian's hands clasped between his knees. "Dorothy," he said gently, "you need to know what is happening. Edward Brennan has been buying up land all around you. He wants to build a resort development, claims the area is perfect for wealthy buyers looking for Montana wilderness experiences. He has made you multiple offers." Dorothy's jaw tightened. "I will not sell," she said firmly. "This land is all I have left of that summer, of James, of the girl I was before everything changed." Jake exchanged a glance with Aaron. "Brennan is not taking no for an answer. There have been complaints filed against you. Minor things about property maintenance and water rights, all likely manufactured to create legal pressure. Then last week, someone tried to break into your house." Dorothy nodded slowly. "I called the sheriff, but by the time they arrived, whoever it was had gone. They took nothing, but they left my back door hanging open like a warning." Aaron felt anger rising in his chest, the old protective instincts that never quite left a soldier even after the uniform came off. Atlas seemed to sense the shift in mood, pressing closer against Aaron's leg. "We are going to help you," Aaron said. And it was not a question or an offer, but a statement of fact. If James hid something that proves your connection to this land, something that might establish your rights here more firmly, we are going to find it. Dorothy looked at him with those sharp eyes, assessing, measuring. Why would you do this for me? You do not know me. Aaron glanced down at Atlas, then back at her. Because my dog led me to that letter, and he led me to you. And I learned a long time ago to trust him when he decides something matters. Because some things are worth fighting for, and love stories deserve better endings than silence and loss. As they prepared to leave, Dorothy walked them to the door, one hand resting lightly on Atlas's head. The dog had not left her side since they arrived. She looked down at him with an expression that mixed wonder and sorrow. James had a dog, she said quietly. A German shepherd named Duke. He was James's shadow, went everywhere with him. Before James deployed, he left Duke with a friend because he could not bear the thought of the dog waiting forever if something happened. Dorothy's voice caught. I always wondered what became of Duke, if he waited, if he understood. Atlas looked up at her, and in that moment Aaron understood why the dog had been so insistent about the letter, about finding Dorothy, about all of it. Some connections transcended time and logic. Some loyalties ran deeper than a single lifetime. As they drove away, Aaron watched Dorothy in the rearview mirror, standing on her porch with her hand raised in farewell, and he felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders like a familiar pack. They had a mystery to solve, and a woman to protect. And somewhere out there, hidden for 73 years, was proof of a love that refused to be forgotten. Atlas barked once, sharp and determined, and Aaron could not help but smile. All right, partner, he said to the dog. Let us find out what James left behind. Let us give Dorothy the ending she deserves. Aaron and Jake returned to the Windmill the following afternoon, with Atlas and a collection of tools borrowed from Jake's truck. The structure looked different now, no longer just a picturesque relic, but a puzzle box holding secrets. Aaron studied the stone foundation building where Atlas had found the first letter, running his hands along the mortared walls, looking for inconsistencies. The dog paced the perimeter with purpose, nose working the air and ground in patterns Aaron had learned to read. Atlas was searching, using that remarkable German shepherd sense of smell that could detect scents invisible to human perception. Jake knocked on wooden beams, listening for hollow sounds that might indicate hidden spaces. The pump house had a dirt floor worn smooth by decades of weather and neglect, and Aaron knelt to examine it more closely. Atlas joined him immediately, pawing at a spot near the southwest corner where the dirt seemed slightly different in color and texture. Aaron began to dig with his hands, brushing away layers of accumulated soil and debris. His fingers struck something solid about 8 inches down. Wood. He worked more carefully now, uncovering the edges of what appeared to be a wooden box, roughly 2 feet square. Jake helped him lift it free, and they carried it outside into the sunlight. The box was surprisingly well preserved, constructed from cedar with brass hinges, green with age. There was no lock, just a simple latch. Aaron opened it slowly and found himself looking at a collection of items wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were more letters tied with ribbon, photographs of a young man in military uniform standing beside a beautiful young woman, a small velvet box containing a simple gold ring, and most importantly, a leather-bound journal with James Whitmore's name embossed on the cover. They sat on the hillside, surrounded by wildflowers, and carefully examined each item. The journal proved to be a detailed account of James's relationship with Dorothy, but also something more. James had been the son of the original homesteaders who built the windmill and owned the surrounding land. According to the journal entries, before his deployment in 1952, James had legally transferred a portion of that land into Dorothy's name through a lawyer in town, wanting to ensure she would have security regardless of what happened to him overseas. He wrote about hiding the deed and related documents in the box, along with a copy of his will, leaving her everything if he did not return. The final entries grew darker. James described receiving threats from his own father, who opposed the relationship and the land transfer, who called Dorothy names that made Aaron's jaw tighten with anger. The last entry was dated 2 days before James was supposed to return to base, and it mentioned a confrontation, a promise to resolve things once and for all. Then the journal ended abruptly. Jake whistled low. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "If these documents are legitimate, Dorothy has owned that land for 73 years. She is not just a stubborn old woman refusing to sell. She is the legal owner, and Brennan has been trying to intimidate her off her own property." Aaron looked up toward the spot where Dorothy's cottage sat against the hillside. "We need to get these to a lawyer, someone who can verify them and help protect her rights." But even as he said it, Atlas suddenly went rigid, ears forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. A man emerged from the tree line about 50 yards away, walking toward them with casual confidence that did not match the tension Atlas clearly sensed. He was in his 40s, well-dressed for the rural setting in pressed jeans and an expensive-looking jacket, his smile too wide and too fixed. "Gentlemen," he called out, "I am Blake Torres. I work for Edward Brennan Development. Heard you have been asking questions around town about the old Windmill property." Aaron stood slowly, positioning himself between Blake and the box of documents, one hand resting on Atlas's shoulder to calm the dog. "Just enjoying the view," he replied evenly. Blake's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. "Mr. Brennan has invested a lot of money in this valley. He does not appreciate interference with his business plans. The old lady needs to understand that progress is inevitable. Some battles are not worth fighting." Jake stepped forward, his usual easy manner replaced by something harder. "Dorothy Chen is not fighting progress. She is living on her own land she has every right to occupy." Blake's gaze flicked to the box, to the documents visible inside, and something shifted in his expression. "Where did you get those?" he asked, and the friendly pretense dropped away entirely. "Those are private property. You are trespassing and stealing." Aaron felt Atlas tense under his hand, the dog reading the threat in Blake's tone and body language. "We found them legally on public land," Aaron said calmly, drawing on years of training to keep his voice level despite the adrenaline beginning to flow. "And from what we have read, they prove Dorothy's ownership. I suggest you tell Brennan to back off before this gets messy." Blake took 2 steps closer, and Atlas lunged forward with a sharp bark that stopped the man in his tracks. The German Shepherd did not attack, but he made his position clear, placing himself directly between Blake and Aaron, hackles raised, teeth visible. Blake's hand moved toward his jacket, and Aaron reacted instantly, catching the man's wrist before he could reach whatever he was going for. For several seconds they stood frozen, Aaron's military-trained grip immobilizing Blake's arm, Atlas vibrating with controlled aggression, Jake moving to flank them. "I am going to give you one chance to walk away," Aaron said quietly. "Tell Brennan we found documentation that complicates his plans. Tell him if anything happens to Dorothy, if her house mysteriously catches fire or she has any unexplained accidents, these documents go straight to the sheriff and every lawyer in the county." Blake jerked his arm free, rubbing his wrist, the cold smile gone completely now. "You do not know what you are getting into," he said. "Brennan has lawyers who will tie you up in court for years. He has connections. That old woman is going to lose either way. Better for everyone if she just takes the money and disappears." Aaron picked up the box and held it against his chest. "The only people who need to disappear are the ones trying to steal from an elderly woman. Come on, Jake. Atlas, heel." They walked past Blake, the dog maintaining his position as rear guard, watching the man with unwavering attention. Aaron could feel Blake's eyes on their backs all the way to the truck. They drove directly to Dorothy's house, Atlas riding with his head out the window, still alert and watchful. When Dorothy opened her door and saw their faces and the box Aaron carried, she knew immediately that something significant had happened. They spread the documents across her kitchen table while she made tea with trembling hands. When Erin showed her the deed with her name on it, dated and notarized in June of 1952, she sat down heavily, one hand pressed to her mouth. "James did this," she whispered. "He really did this. He wanted me to have security even if he never came back." The photographs made her cry, gentle tears that tracked down her weathered cheeks as she touched the images of her young self and the man she had loved. The ring brought a small, sad smile. "He proposed the night before he left," she said softly. "I told him I would wait forever if I had to. I never imagined forever would be this long." Jake was already on his phone, calling a lawyer friend in town, explaining the situation in clipped, urgent sentences. Erin sat across from Dorothy, the journal open in his hands. "Dorothy," he said gently, "there is something else you should know." James wrote about a confrontation with his father, about threats. The journal ends abruptly. "Did you ever find out what happened to him?" Dorothy nodded slowly, her fingers still touching the photograph. 6 months after he left, the Army notified his family that he had been killed in action overseas. But I always wondered. His father would not let me attend the funeral. Told me I had no right, that I had caused James nothing but trouble. I tried to ask questions, but no one would tell me anything. Erin and Jake exchanged glances. There was more to this story, layers they had not yet uncovered, but the immediate priority was protecting Dorothy from Brennan and his tactics. Jake hung up his phone. "My lawyer friend says we need to get these documents verified and registered immediately. If they are legitimate, and he thinks they will be, Dorothy's ownership is ironclad. But we should expect Brennan to fight back hard. He is probably already hearing about our confrontation with Blake." Erin looked out the window toward the windmill visible on its hill, golden in the afternoon light. "We need to assume Brennan will escalate," he said. "Dorothy, you should not stay here alone tonight. Do you have family you can call?" Dorothy shook her head. "My parents passed years ago. I have a daughter, Ursula. But we have been distant. She lives in the city. Thinks I should have sold and moved to a retirement home years ago. We have not spoken in months." Jake pulled out his phone again. "Give me her number. If there is one thing that brings families together, it is a threat to one of their own. Your daughter needs to know what is happening." While Jake made the call, Erin walked outside with Atlas, needing air and space to think. The dog pressed against his leg, still vigilant. Erin looked down at his companion. This remarkable animal who had started all of this by finding a letter, who had led them to Dorothy, who had sensed danger before it fully revealed itself. "Good boy," he said quietly, scratching behind the dog's ears. "You knew this mattered, did not you? You knew we needed to help her." Atlas looked up at him with those intelligent amber eyes, and Erin would have sworn the dog understood every word. Ursula Chen arrived that evening, driving up from Billings in a sleek sedan that looked out of place in the rural setting. She was a polished woman in her early 50s, dressed in business casual attire, her expression tight with worry and barely concealed frustration. The reunion between mother and daughter was awkward at first. Years of distance creating walls neither seemed to know how to dismantle. But when Jake explained the situation, when Erin showed her the documents and told her about Blake's threats, something shifted in Ursula's face. "That is my mother's land," she said quietly, and Erin heard steel beneath the words. No one is taking it from her. They spent the evening making plans. Jake's lawyer friend confirmed the documents appeared legitimate and would begin the legal process to register Dorothy's ownership officially. But paperwork took time, and Brennan clearly had resources. Erin suggested they needed to find out more about what happened to James, whether his death was truly what it seemed. The journal had mentioned confrontation with his father, threats, and then silence. Dorothy produced old newspaper clippings she had saved, yellowed and fragile, reporting James Whitmore's death in military service overseas. But something about the dates bothered Erin. According to the journal, James had written his last entry just 2 days before his scheduled return to base, Yet the official death notice listed him as killed in action weeks earlier. The timeline did not match. Jake leaned over the documents, his brow furrowed. Either the journal dates are wrong or something else happened. Something someone wanted covered up. Atlas, who had been lying by Dorothy's feet all evening, suddenly stood and moved to the window, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Aaron joined the dog at the window, peering out into the darkness beyond the porch light's reach. Movement caught his eye, a shadow that separated from other shadows near the tree line. Someone was out there watching the house. He killed the interior lights with a sharp command, and everyone froze. In the sudden darkness, Aaron's military training kicked in, his mind automatically cataloging exits and defensive positions. "Jake, take Dorothy and Ursula to the back bedroom," he said quietly. "Call the sheriff. I'm going out there with Atlas." Ursula started to protest, but her mother stopped her with a hand on her arm. "That man served his country," Dorothy said softly, looking at Aaron. "He knows what he is doing. Trust him." Aaron clipped a lead on Atlas more for show than control, then slipped out the front door, moving silently along the porch. The dog matched his pace perfectly, both of them shadows among shadows. They circled wide around the property, using the darkness and terrain for cover. Atlas's ears swiveled, tracking sounds Aaron could not yet hear. Then the dog stopped, body going rigid, and Aaron saw them. Two men, one of them Blake, crouched near Dorothy's small storage shed. They were doing something with the propane tank that fed the house's heating system. Aaron's blood went cold. They were not just watching, they were sabotaging. He released Atlas with a single word command he had trained into the dog over 3 years. Protect. The German Shepherd exploded forward with terrifying speed, covering 30 yards in seconds, a blur of muscle and focused aggression. Blake never saw him coming. Atlas hit the man low and hard, knocking him away from the propane tank, teeth finding purchase on Blake's forearm and holding with controlled force that neutralized without maiming. The second man, startled, fumbled for something in his jacket. But Aaron was already there, years of combat training making his movements efficient and devastating. He struck precisely, disabling the threat, then had the man face down on the ground with his knee in the man's back before the stranger could fully process what had happened. Blake was screaming for Atlas to release, but the dog held firm, waiting for Aaron's command. The lights from the house came on, flooding the yard, and Jake appeared with a shotgun Aaron had not known the veterinarian owned. "Sheriff is 5 minutes out," Jake called, his voice admirably steady. Aaron secured both men with zip ties from his truck, while Atlas maintained guard position, hackles still raised, eyes locked on Blake with unwavering focus. Aaron checked the propane tank and found the valve loosened, gas hissing softly into the night air. Another hour, and the accumulation could have led to an explosion from any spark or flame. These men had not come to threaten. They had come to kill. Blake spat blood from where he had bitten his own tongue in the takedown. "You do not know who you are messing with," he managed. "Brennan owns half the county. You just assaulted his employees." Aaron crouched down to Blake's level. "You just attempted arson and attempted murder," he said calmly. "Atlas here is trained to protect, and he did exactly what he was supposed to do when he saw you threatening my friend's property. Any injuries you sustained were a direct result of your own criminal actions. I am a witness, and I am a veteran with a spotless record. Who do you think the sheriff is going to believe?" The sheriff arrived with deputies, and the scene that greeted them was clear-cut. Two men caught in the act of tampering with a propane tank, one veteran and his protection dog who had stopped them, and multiple witnesses including a veterinarian and 2 women inside the house who had seen everything. Blake tried to spin a story, but it fell apart under questioning, especially when Aaron showed the sheriff the documents they had found, proving Dorothy's ownership and explaining Brennan's motive. The deputies took Blake and his accomplice into custody, while the sheriff, a weathered man named Collins who had seen every kind of trouble Montana could produce, sat down with Aaron and Jake. "Edward Brennan has been a problem," Collins admitted quietly. "He comes in, makes promises about jobs and development. But what he really does is pressure people until they sell cheap. then flips the land for triple the price. We have suspected him of using intimidation tactics, but nobody would testify. You just gave me something solid to work with." But Collins also warned them. "Brennan will not stop. He has lawyers and money and connections. Even with these arrests, he will find ways to make trouble. You need to be ready for escalation. Dorothy needs protection until this is resolved." Aaron looked at Atlas, who sat calmly beside him now, the controlled aggression gone, replaced by alert watchfulness. "We are not going anywhere," Aaron said. "Neither is Dorothy." But circumstances forced their hand 2 days later. Jake called Aaron early in the morning, his voice urgent. "The lawyer found something," he said without preamble. "James Whitmore's military records. There are inconsistencies. His death was reported, but there is no grave, no body returned to family. And get this, there are reports of him being seen in Montana weeks after his supposed death date. Aaron, I think James might have been murdered here, not overseas. And I think his father might have been involved." Aaron felt ice run through his veins. If that was true, if James had been killed before he could deploy, then someone had covered it up for 73 years. And if there was evidence of that crime, it might still be hidden somewhere. Where would James have put proof? He asked. Somewhere safe. Somewhere only Dorothy would think to look. The answer came to him and Jake at the same moment. "The forest," Jake said. He wrote about a cave in the journal, remember? A place they had explored together. That is where he would hide anything that dangerous. Aaron thought about the journal entries, the references to hiking in the wilderness behind the windmill, exploring the old-growth forests and rock formations. James had been intimate with that landscape. If he had feared for his life and needed to hide evidence, he would have put it somewhere only he and Dorothy knew. "We need to go into the forest," Aaron said. "Now, before Brennan figures out what we are looking for." But Jake's voice held warning. "Aaron, there is a storm system moving in. Weather Service is calling for severe conditions by late afternoon. High winds, heavy rain, temperature drops. Going into the backcountry now would be dangerous." Aaron looked out his window at the clear morning sky, then down at Atlas, who watched him with those knowing eyes. "We do not have a choice," he said quietly. "If Brennan gets to whatever James hid first, Dorothy loses everything, and a 73-year-old murder stays buried. We have to move now." They assembled at the windmill by mid-morning. Aaron, Jake, Ursula, who insisted on coming, and Atlas. Dorothy wanted to join them, but they convinced her to stay behind with a deputy Collins had assigned for protection. She gave them directions from memory, describing the trail that led into the national forest, the landmarks James had mentioned in long-ago conversations, the cave system he had been fascinated by. "It is about 5 miles in," she said, her voice trembling with age and emotion. "There is a formation that looks like a tower, granite rising maybe 50 feet. The cave entrance is at its base, hidden by overgrowth. James said it went deep, that native peoples had used it for shelter centuries ago. Please be careful. Please find the truth." Aaron shouldered his pack, checking his supplies one more time. Emergency shelter, first aid, water, food, lights, rope. He had done this before, gone into hostile territory with incomplete information, and trusted his training to see him through. This was just another mission. They started up the trail with Atlas in the lead, the dog moving with purpose as if he understood the stakes. The morning was beautiful, wildflowers still bright along the path, birds calling from the pines. But Aaron watched the western sky where clouds were beginning to build, dark and ominous. They had maybe 6 hours before the storm hit. They needed to be in and out before then. 3 miles in, the trail became harder to follow, overgrown from decades of disuse. Atlas proved invaluable, his nose finding the path when their eyes could not, leading them with confidence that bordered on supernatural. The dog had become more than a companion on this journey. He was their guide, their early warning system, their connection to something deeper than logic. Aaron found himself trusting Atlas's instincts completely, following when the dog veered off what looked like the main trail, watching when the dog stopped to test the air. Ursula struggled with the terrain, her city life leaving her unprepared for wilderness hiking. but she pushed forward with determination that reminded Aaron of her mother. Jake kept checking his phone even though there was no signal this deep in the forest, watching the weather radar from his last update. "Storm is accelerating," he said grimly. "We have maybe 4 hours now." They reached the granite tower formation just after noon. It rose from the forest floor like an ancient sentinel, gray stone weathered by millennia, streaked with lichen and moss. Atlas immediately began circling the base, nose down, searching. Aaron joined him, looking for the cave entrance Dorothy had described. It took 20 minutes of careful searching before they found it, concealed behind a massive deadfall and thick undergrowth. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but it opened into a larger space beyond. Aaron clicked on his flashlight and peered inside. "The cave," he said quietly, and felt the weight of history pressing down on them. They entered one by one, Atlas leading without hesitation. The cave was larger than Aaron expected, a natural chamber maybe 20 feet across with passages leading deeper into darkness. The air smelled of stone and earth and dampness. Their lights revealed signs of old use, fire rings blackened with ancient charcoal, fragments of pottery, pictographs on the walls. But they also found something more recent. A metal box wedged into a crevice high on the cave wall, hidden from casual observation, but positioned where someone who knew where to look could find it. Aaron climbed up, his fingers closing around the cold metal, and pulled it free. The box was locked but rusted, and Jake used a rock to break it open. Inside, they found documents in waterproof wrapping, photographs, and a letter addressed to Dorothy in James's handwriting. Aaron was about to read it when Atlas suddenly erupted in sharp warning barks, facing the cave entrance. Aaron's head snapped up and his heart sank. Edward Brennan stood at the entrance, backlit by daylight, and he was not alone. Blake, somehow released or escaped, stood beside him, along with 2 other men Aaron did not recognize, and Blake was holding a gun. "Nobody move," Brennan said, his cultured voice echoing in the stone chamber. "You are all trespassing on what will soon be my property. I will take those documents now." Outside, Aaron could hear the wind rising, the first sign of the approaching storm. Aaron measured the distance, the angles, the odds. 4 men, 1 armed, blocking the only exit. Ursula behind him, Jake to his side, Atlas coiled and ready, but trained not to attack without command. The metal box felt heavy in his hands, weighted with truth and 73 years of injustice. "You do not want to do this, Brennan," Aaron said calmly. "There are people who know where we are. You cannot make 4 people disappear without consequences." Brennan smiled without humor. "Can I not? The woods are dangerous. Storms kill people every year. 4 inexperienced hikers caught in severe weather, taking shelter in an unstable cave system. Tragic accidents happen." Blake leveled the gun at Aaron's chest. "The documents. Now, or I start with you and the dog." Aaron's mind raced through scenarios, all of them bad. Then Atlas made the decision for all of them. The German Shepherd lunged forward with explosive power, not at Blake, but at Brennan himself. 70 pounds of muscle and bone and protective fury that struck the developer like a freight train. Blake swung the gun toward the dog, and Aaron moved, hurling himself forward, even as Jake shouted and Ursula screamed. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, echoing and re-echoing until Aaron could not tell if it was one shot or many. Aaron hit Blake low, tackling him, grappling for the weapon. They crashed into the cave wall together, and Aaron felt pain explode in his ribs, but he did not let go. His training took over, muscle memory from 1,000 drills, and he had Blake disarmed and subdued in seconds that felt like hours. Jake had grabbed a rock and was holding off one of the other men, while Atlas had Brennan pinned, teeth at the man's throat but not biting, just holding, just controlling. The 4th man turned and ran. Aaron heard him crashing through the forest, fleeing. Then he heard something else, a deep rumble that was not thunder. The storm had arrived with shocking violence, wind suddenly howling through the cave entrance, rain coming in sheets. But there was something else too, a sound that made Aaron's blood run cold, the crack and groan of the deadfall that partially concealed the cave entrance. The ancient trees, already unstable, were shifting in the violent wind. "Get back!" Aaron shouted, pulling Blake deeper into the cave even as he heard the massive crash of tons of wood collapsing across the entrance. In seconds, the opening was blocked, daylight reduced to thin cracks between massive logs, the roar of the storm suddenly muffled. They were trapped. For a moment, nobody moved, the reality of their situation sinking in. Then Aaron took control, his combat experience giving him clarity even as others panicked. "Jake, check everyone for injuries. Ursula, inventory whatever supplies we have. Atlas, guard." The dog moved to stand over Blake and Brennan, making it clear neither man would be moving without permission. Aaron pulled out his phone even though he knew there would be no signal. Nothing. They were on their own until the storm passed and rescue could reach them. He examined the blocked entrance. The deadfall was massive, probably tons of wood wedged tight. They were not moving it from inside, which meant they needed another way out, or they needed to wait for rescue, and with the storm raging outside, rescue could be a long time coming. Aaron turned his attention to the cave itself, to the passages leading deeper. James had written about extensive cave systems. Maybe there was another exit, but exploring unknown caves in the dark with a storm overhead was incredibly dangerous. They could get lost, trapped, injured. Jake finished checking everyone. Ursula had cuts and bruises. Blake had a broken nose from Atlas's attack. Brennan was shaken, but unharmed. Aaron himself could feel his ribs aching where he had hit the wall, but nothing felt broken. They had maybe 3 days of food and water if they rationed. The temperature in the cave was cold, but not freezing. They could survive, but only if they stayed calm and worked together. Aaron looked at Brennan, at Blake, at the documents that had caused all this trouble. Then he opened the metal box and read James's letter by flashlight. It detailed everything. How James's father had discovered the land transfer to Dorothy. How the old man had flown into a rage, calling James a traitor to his race for loving a Chinese woman. How the father had threatened to have Dorothy deported, arrested on false charges, or worse. James had confronted his father, and the confrontation had turned physical. In the struggle, James's father had struck him, a fatal blow that the old man then tried to cover up by claiming James had deployed early. Friends in the military had helped falsify records. James was buried in an unmarked grave on the family ranch, his death reported as overseas combat to avoid investigation. The documents included a confession written by one of the father's accomplices years later, photographs of the burial site, and a map. It was all there. Proof of murder and conspiracy that had kept Dorothy Chen from the truth and from the man she loved for 73 years. Aaron looked up to find everyone staring at him. "Your father killed James Whitmore," he said to no one in particular, then focused on Brennan. "And you knew. That is why you wanted this land so badly. If anyone found the burial site during development, questions would be asked. DNA tests would be run. The whole thing would unravel." Brennan said nothing, but his face had gone gray. The storm raged outside for hours. They sat in the cold darkness, conserving flashlight batteries, sharing what little food they had. Atlas curled against Aaron, sharing warmth, occasionally checking on the others like a shepherd tending his flock. Despite everything, despite being trapped with the men who had tried to kill them, Aaron felt an odd sense of peace. They had found the truth. Dorothy would finally know what happened to James. Justice, delayed 73 years, would finally be served. Ursula sat beside Aaron, her voice quiet in the darkness. "My mother waited her whole life for him," she said. "She never married, never even dated that I knew of. I thought she was just stubborn, just stuck in the past. But she was honoring a promise, honoring love." Aaron understood that kind of loyalty, that kind of devotion. He looked at Atlas, who had found the first letter, who had led them to Dorothy, who had protected them when violence came. Dogs understood loyalty in ways humans often forgot. They understood that some promises transcended death, that some bonds could not be broken by time or distance, or even tragedy. Atlas had inherited Duke's mission, carrying it forward across generations, ensuring James's story was finally told. When the storm finally passed, leaving an eerie silence in its wake, Aaron heard voices calling from outside. Sheriff Collins and a search and rescue team had tracked them using Jake's last known GPS coordinates. It took hours to clear the deadfall enough to extract everyone from the cave. They emerged into a transformed landscape, trees down everywhere, the forest torn and broken by wind and water. But the sky was clear, evening light turning everything gold, and Aaron had never seen anything more beautiful. The rescue team had brought Dorothy, who had refused to stay behind once the storm passed. When Ursula emerged and mother and daughter embraced, both crying, Aaron had to look away from the raw emotion. When he finally showed Dorothy the documents, read her James's final letter professing his eternal love and exposing the truth of his murder, the old woman wept in a way that seemed to release 73 years of grief all at once. "He did love me," she whispered. "He kept his promise. He tried to come back. It was not his fault." Aaron knelt beside her, Atlas pressing close. "He loved you until his last breath," Aaron said gently, "and he made sure you would know the truth eventually. That is what all of this was for, to keep his promise to you." The weeks that followed moved with the inexorable weight of justice finally catching up to decades of lies. Sheriff Collins worked with the county prosecutor to build a case that spanned 73 years, piecing together testimony, documents, and physical evidence. The confession James had secured from one of his father's accomplices became the keystone of the investigation. Forensic teams excavated the burial site James's map had indicated, finding remains that DNA testing confirmed belonged to James Whitmore. The cause of death matched what the confession described: blunt force trauma to the skull, not combat injuries overseas. Edward Brennan found himself facing charges not for murder, which his grandfather had committed, but for conspiracy to conceal evidence, intimidation, attempted arson, and a host of other crimes related to his efforts to hide the truth and force Dorothy from her land. Blake Torres and his accomplice faced even more serious charges, including attempted murder and arson. The legal proceedings would take months to fully resolve, but the essential facts were clear. Dorothy Chen was the legal owner of her property and the land surrounding the windmill, and the man she had loved had not abandoned her, but had died trying to protect her and their future together. The story made regional news, and then national news, a tale of love and loss and justice delayed, but not denied, that resonated with people across the country. Aaron tried to avoid the media attention, but found himself giving interviews anyway, always deflecting credit to Atlas, to Jake, to Dorothy's courage, to the power of truth refusing to stay buried. Dorothy transformed in the aftermath, grief and vindication mingling in ways that seemed to ease burdens she had carried for a lifetime. She finally had answers, finally knew that James had loved her until his last moment, that he had tried to secure her future even when facing threats from his own family. The knowledge that his death had nothing to do with war, but everything to do with prejudice and rage over their love was painful, but it was also clarifying. She had not been wrong to wait, to hope, to hold on to the memory of that summer when everything seemed possible. Ursula moved back to Montana, taking a leave from her city job to spend time with her mother. Aaron watched the two women slowly rebuild their relationship, navigating conversations they should have had years ago. One afternoon, he found them sitting together on Dorothy's porch, going through old photographs, and the sound of their laughter carried across the wildflower meadow like music. Ursula sought him out later, her eyes red but peaceful. "Thank you," she said simply. "I had forgotten who my mother was, forgotten that her stubbornness came from loyalty and her silence from heartbreak. You gave me my mother back, and you gave her closure she never thought she would have." Aaron did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude he did not feel he had earned. Atlas had started this, had found the letter, had led them down this path. The dog was the real hero. But Atlas could not accept medals or recognition, so they came to Aaron instead. The local VFW post honored him at their monthly meeting, presenting him with a plaque that praised his service to the community and his embodiment of the values that defined veterans everywhere. Jake was there, grinning, and so was Dorothy and Ursula. The sheriff attended and gave a speech about citizens who stepped up when others needed help. Aaron stood in front of these people, many of them veterans like himself, many of them old enough to remember when Hidden Meadows was smaller and quieter, and he tried to articulate what the past weeks had meant to him. "I left the military 2 years ago," he began, his voice rough with emotion he had not expected. "And I did not know what to do with myself. I had spent so long with a clear mission, with purpose built into every day, that civilian life felt empty by comparison. I was just marking time, waiting for something to matter again." He looked down at Atlas sitting beside him, the German shepherd's eyes fixed on his face with that unwavering attention. "Then I adopted this dog, and he gave me a new mission. He led me to Dorothy, to a mystery that needed solving, to a wrong that needed righting. He reminded me that service does not end when you take off the uniform. It just changes shape." The audience applauded, and Aaron felt something in his chest loosen, a knot of tension he had been carrying since his discharge finally beginning to unravel. In late June, the community organized a memorial service for James Whitmore at the Windmill. His remains were cremated at Dorothy's request, and she scattered them among the wildflowers that surrounded the old structure, giving him the resting place he should have had 73 years earlier. The ceremony was simple, but deeply moving. Jake spoke about love that transcends death. Ursula read from James's letters, his words about Dorothy and their dreams still powerful across the decades. The local minister said prayers that honored both James's life and the long wait Dorothy had endured. When it was Dorothy's turn to speak, she stood small but straight in the golden afternoon light, the meadow blazing with color around her. "James Whitmore was stolen from me," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But his love was never taken. I carried it with me every day for 73 years. I built my life around the truth of what we shared, even when others told me to forget, to move on, to accept that it was over." She paused, looking out across the valley she had never left. "Love is not measured in time together, but in the promises we keep and the faith we hold." James kept his promises. He protected me even in death, leaving proof of his love and ensuring I would know the truth eventually. I kept my promise too. I waited, I believed, and now, finally, we both can rest. She scattered the ashes, and they caught in the wind, drifting across the wildflowers like a blessing, like coming home after the longest journey imaginable. That evening, as the sun set in bands of coral and gold, Aaron walked the meadow with Atlas. The windmill stood silhouetted against the sky, no longer a monument to loss, but a testament to enduring love. Dorothy had decided to restore it, to bring it back to working condition as a historical landmark. She and Ursula were planning to turn part of the property into a small museum dedicated to telling James's story and preserving the history of the homesteaders who had built lives in these valleys. It would be a place of healing, of remembrance, of honoring love that refused to be defeated by prejudice or violence. Aaron thought about the chain of events that had brought them to this moment, how a single letter, hidden for 73 years, had set everything in motion, how Atlas, with instincts that defied explanation, had found that letter and refused to let it go, how a dog who had never known James Whitmore or his German shepherd Duke had somehow carried forward a mission of loyalty and justice across generations. There were things in this world that transcended logic, connections that ran deeper than bloodlines. Atlas had taught him that, had shown him that service took many forms and that purpose could be found in the most unexpected places. The dog pressed against his leg now, warm and solid, and Aaron rested his hand on the German shepherd's head. "Good boy," he whispered into the gathering dusk. "You did good." The story should have ended there, with justice served and closure achieved, but life rarely offered such neat conclusions. Aaron found that the mission had changed him in ways he was still discovering. He began volunteering at the local Veterans Center, talking with other former service members about the challenges of transition, the struggle to find purpose outside the military structure. He discovered he had a gift for it, for listening without judgment, for sharing his own journey from emptiness to meaning. Jake recruited him to help with search and rescue training for the county, putting his wilderness skills and Atlas's natural abilities to use in a program that saved lives. Dorothy insisted he use a portion of her land for a training facility where veterans could work with rescue dogs, building bonds that served both healing and practical purposes. The project grew organically, becoming something larger than Aaron had imagined, a place where former soldiers could find purpose and where animals who needed homes could find partners who understood loyalty and dedication. "Sometimes life gives you a second act," Dorothy told him one afternoon as they watched a group of veterans working with their dogs in the meadow below the windmill. "James and I never got ours, but you can. Make it count, make it matter." Aaron thought about the man he had been 2 years ago, drifting and disconnected, and the man he was becoming, engaged and purposeful. The transformation had started with a simple walk to an abandoned windmill, with trusting a dog who seemed to know something important waited to be found. On a bright morning in early August, Aaron received a call from Sheriff Collins. The prosecutor had reached plea agreements with Brennan and his associates. They would serve significant prison time and pay restitution to Dorothy for their crimes. The legal system had worked slowly, but it had worked, and the case that had begun with a 73-year-old murder was finally closed. Collins thanked Aaron again for his role in bringing everything to light, then added something that surprised him. "We are getting calls from families with other cold cases, people who heard Dorothy's story and wonder if their own unsolved mysteries could be resolved. There is talk of forming a cold case unit, using new DNA techniques and old-fashioned investigation. Would you be interested in consulting? I think you have a knack for this, and that dog of yours is something special." Aaron looked at Atlas, who was watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. The dog had given him back his sense of purpose, had led him on a journey that restored his connection to the things that mattered. Maybe there were other journeys waiting, other wrongs that needed righting, other families who deserved answers. He thought about Dorothy and the relief on her face when she finally learned the truth. About Ursula and the relationship with her mother that had been restored. About James Whitmore, who had tried so hard to protect the woman he loved. That kind of loyalty, that kind of love, deserved to be honored. Sometimes the greatest love stories are not about the ending, but about the promise kept by those who come after. If you have a story about an unbreakable bond with your loyal companion, please share it in the comments below. These connections that transcend words and touch something primal in the human heart remind us that we are never truly alone, that loyalty and love persist even in the darkest times. Aaron sat on his porch that evening, Atlas beside him, watching the sun set over the mountains. The windmill was visible in the distance, its restored blades beginning to turn again, catching the wind, drawing water from deep beneath the earth, just as it had more than a century ago. Some things endured. Some promises remained unbroken. Some missions continued across time and circumstance, carried forward by those willing to listen, to search, to refuse to let injustice have the final word. He scratched behind Atlas's ears, and the dog leaned into his touch, the bond between them as strong as forged steel, built on trust and shared purpose, and countless hours of simply being together. In saving Dorothy, in uncovering the truth about James, Aaron had discovered his own truth. Service had never really ended for him. It had just been waiting for him to recognize it in a new form, to understand that protecting and helping others was not confined to battlefields or uniforms, but could be lived out in small towns and quiet valleys, in standing up for those who could not stand for themselves, in refusing to accept that time-erased accountability. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories of courage, loyalty, and love like this one. These are the stories that matter, that remind us of our better selves, that show us what is possible when we choose to care about something larger than our own comfort or convenience. Aaron knew he would continue this work, whatever form it took, because Atlas had shown him the way. The German Shepherd had inherited a mission from another dog decades ago, had carried it forward through instinct and devotion, and had enlisted Aaron in something meaningful and lasting. That was the gift of dogs, Aaron thought. Their absolute faith in us even when we lacked faith in ourselves. Their unwavering belief that we were capable of being the people they already saw in us. Click on the video appearing on your screen now for another incredible journey. And to all veterans and their families, we honor your service and sacrifice. The fight does not end when you come home. It just changes, becoming quieter but no less important, shifting from grand battles to small acts of courage, from protecting distant borders to defending the vulnerable in your own community. Aaron Mitchell had found his way back to purpose through an abandoned windmill, a 73-year-old love letter, and a German shepherd who understood that some promises must be kept, no matter how long it takes. In the gathering darkness, with Atlas warm and solid beside him, Aaron felt something he had not experienced since leaving the military. He felt whole. He felt needed. He felt ready for whatever mission came next, knowing that as long as he had his loyal companion beside him, they would face it together. The veteran and his dog, carrying forward the unbreakable bond between soldiers and the animals who serve alongside them, generation after generation, promise after promise, mission after mission, forever.